What is going on, everybody? It is so good to be back. Welcome in to my 2021 NFL Deep Dive series, where we are going to be diving into each NFL team in descending order of my power rankings for the upcoming season. Now, I'm proud of everything I do on this channel, but none more than this series right here. And there's a lot of amazing analysts out there, and I don't mean any disrespect to them, but I truly believe you will not find a deeper, more comprehensive preview of the full NFL heading into next season. So with that said, please do hit that like button down below to support the channel, support this series. It really does help. Also, if you enjoy, do remember to subscribe and turn on that bell notification icon so you don't miss any uploads throughout this series. So we've got the deep dive series revamped this year. I'm super excited to bring it to you guys. Let's go ahead and get started with the Houston Texans, which is going to be one of the more unique team breakdowns that we've ever done, given all of the moving pieces here. So your key departures this year, obviously the coaching staff. Bill O'Brien on his way out. He's been out since midseason last year. That was well overdue. But Romeo Crennel gone as well, a defensive change through and through, not just staff but scheme. We'll get into that. And then I do want to address the Deshaun Watson situation off the bat here, because that really is the core, integral question for this entire deep dive. Does Deshaun Watson play football for the Texans in 2021? And you know, the show must go on. At some point, I had to make a decision on this so we could get the series started. So I'm going to say no for the purposes of this video. I think all cards seem to be pointing in that direction. And, you know, the key decider there for me was the Texans drafting Davis Mills with really their first pick in the draft in the third round. That was a premeditated decision. They had this entire offseason to decide what to do with that pick, and they go quarterback, which to me says with that and Tyrod Taylor, they're okay moving on from Deshaun Watson. Not that they're guaranteeing that they do, but they're preparing for life after Deshaun Watson here. So to me, that was enough for me to say it is more likely than not at this point in time that Deshaun Watson is not playing any football for the Texans in 2021. That said, I've been on the record really saying not that it's likely he comes back, but that it's more likely than the media and public perception makes it sound that Deshaun Watson is actually back in Houston, at least for this year, if not for the long run. There's a lot of complications here. For one, with his whole off-the-field drama, I'm not going to make any assumptions on what's true, what's not true. That's not for me to determine. I'm just looking at this strictly from analyzing the team's perspective. If, you know, worst case scenario, what he's done, which is terrible, what he's doing with these women, but again, I'm not trying to make any assumptions. The point is, if this becomes a worst case scenario, I still don't think it becomes a full season suspension. Just to be blunt, I think we've seen more serious offenses for worse football players, and they still get, you know, lesser penalties than a full season. So just looking at this from a full predictive standpoint, not saying what's right or wrong, I think maybe 6 game suspension, 8 games is like a worst case scenario. I think it's possible that he doesn't face any suspension at all. So that's just being realistic about the situation there. So that's not really going to keep him off the field the whole year. And then it becomes like, if he does get suspended, is anyone going to trade all that draft capital for him this year? That's tough. I've talked a lot about how his contract situation makes it very difficult for the Texans to move on from him. He just signed that massive franchise elite quarterback, $100+ million guaranteed contract. To be real here, like, these front offices, when someone has their name linked to that much guaranteed money, there is a financial aspect of that. It's like, we can't pay you $100 million to play for someone else for the next 4 seasons. It's just logistically very difficult to say that's going to happen. So there's a lot of difficulties there, and I think there is a world where the pieces fall in line, where Deshaun Watson is actually back here and actually could even start day one. And like I said, if that happens, the Texans are not the 32nd worst team in the NFL. So that's out of the way. One of the most unique breakdowns that we've had to do because of all of the moving pieces here. Very difficult to kind of wrap your mind around and predict what's going to happen here. But that's where I'm at this point in time with Watson. And let's now continue as if Deshaun Watson will not be playing for the Texans, whether it's a trade, a suspension, a holdout, whatever it may be. So let's go ahead and continue there. The key departures for this team beyond Deshaun Watson, you've got most of the coaching staff out. They did keep their offensive coordinator, Tim Kelly, in there, who's going to work with David Culley, the new head coach. But Bill O'Brien, obviously out, got fired last season. And Romeo Crennel, the longtime defensive coordinator, is gone. This team's been a 3-4 defense seemingly forever. And with Lovie Smith coming in, the assumption is they will be now a 4-3 cover 2 system there on defense. And then Will Fuller is out. That was kind of a bummer for the Texans. They played hardball at the trade deadline last year. They could have gotten a pick for him, and I think they thought that he would get more in free agency. Frankly, I thought he would get more in free agency than Miami had to pay him. So they kind of miss out on a high compensatory pick there. J.J. Watt out, kind of a parting nature there, just moving on for greener pastures. Final year of his contract. They make a trade. They send Benardrick McKinney to Miami for Shaq Lawson. I think plays favorably for the Texans on their side. Not that it was bad for Miami, but I did think that made sense for them. Benardrick McKinney really doesn't fit this new system with Lovie Smith, who likes linebackers that can flip their hips and get vertical in those cover 2 defenses. And then Garyon Conley is just a piece that they're going to have to replace. Not that he was amazing, but he was a starting caliber corner, and that's not always easy to replace. They brought in Terrence Marshall, who doesn't make the list of key additions, who I think will play that cornerback 2 role. Other key additions here, we mentioned David Culley, the new head coach, coming in. I do think that with Tyrod Taylor also coming in, we will see an integration of that Baltimore read option, play action heavy offense here with Tyrod Taylor, who at his best is going to be used in the quarterback run game. So we'll talk about all that stuff when we get into the kind of offensive breakdown. Then they had a nice signing of Desmond King at slot corner. Nice player. I love how he fits in this system, getting back to running a lot more zone coverage like he did when he was a Pro Bowler for the LA Chargers. I love the scheme for Desmond King. I think that was the best move that they made from a personnel standpoint this offseason. And then the Shaq Lawson trade, like I said, I think that was getting a better scheme fit, getting good value for one of your better players in Benardrick McKinney, who wasn't going to be a great scheme fit in Lovie Smith's defense, and upgrading the defensive line that desperately needed it. I will say before we move on to the offensive breakdown, there's a lot of key additions that did not make my list here because it's just a lot of small stuff that they did. Things like Marcus Cannon, Kevin Pierre-Louis. We mentioned the signing of Terrence Mitchell. For what it's worth, I actually was pretty impressed with the job that Nick Caserio was able to do. I'm not going to say the Texans are in good hands necessarily, but giving the context that it looked like this team was going to blow everything up, they were going to have a hard time signing free agents, that nobody wanted to be here. I actually like almost everything they did this offseason, again, all things considered, because it was going to be really tough with the organizational dysfunction. And I thought they brought in a lot of veterans. They've established this sort of chip on my shoulder, why not us culture. And we'll talk about that as we go. I think that's one of the best things this Texans team has going for them as this kind of underdog Cinderella team. But that's obviously all things considered, trying to find something nice to say about the team. But I do think it's true. I was relatively impressed by the job that the new GM was able to pull off there with bringing in a lot of quality veterans. If nothing else, they will have depth and will be injury averse and always have that next man up mentality with some decent talent to go. So let's get into the offensive breakdown, starting with the quarterback room. Tyrod Taylor being the guy here with Deshaun Watson kind of out of the picture. Now, like I said, they'd rank 4th here with Deshaun Watson. I think that's pretty widely agreed upon. You've got Mahomes, Rodgers, and Russ, and then most people would slide Deshaun Watson into that 4th spot, which I agree with. But unfortunately, without him, the picture is not so pretty. Now, Tyrod Taylor, we mentioned the sort of chip on their shoulder, why not us culture approach. Tyrod Taylor may have been the perfect signing to match that culture, and obviously the quarterback is going to be the one that sets the tone with that culture. He really got screwed last year by the Chargers medical staff, who punctured a hole in his lung, and then they obviously went to Justin Herbert after he looked like the next, the future in the NFL. So Tyrod Taylor misses out on an opportunity. Anthony Lynn had really stuck his neck out for Tyrod Taylor and was going to give him an opportunity to maybe earn a more serious look. Unfortunately for him, an opportunity popped up here in Houston with the Deshaun Watson situation. Now, Tyrod is what he is. He's always been in that, 33 to 36 range of quarterbacks in the league. He's never been able to establish himself as a starter, and I don't really predict that to happen here, but I do like a lot of the fits here from a schematic and culture point of view. Again, the chip on your shoulder, him getting that redemption opportunity here, the why not us mentality. We got to look into his work behavior and his leadership traits in the Chargers Hard Knocks last year. I fell in love with Tyrod Taylor. I can't think of a veteran player that I would enjoy seeing more kind of proving people wrong and breaking out at age 30, 31. So obviously rooting for Tyrod Taylor here, but to be realistic, it's just not very likely. It's not a very QB-friendly environment here at this point in time. But I think there's aspects that could work here. I mentioned David Culley coming in from Baltimore. I would be stunned rather, that if we did not see the integration of the Ravens read option, heavy personnel, run-heavy system here. They signed the 3 running backs, or they have 3 running backs. That seems to be what they're going for. And if you're going to build an offense for Tyrod Taylor, that is the offense. Maximize his running ability, because let's face it, he's just never been an accurate passer, and at this point in time, you're not predicting that to change. Most quarterbacks throughout history are not Josh Allen, they're not Lamar Jackson. If you have accuracy issues, usually those things just don't develop. So that's Tyrod Taylor. I think he can work here. I certainly hope he does. But to be realistic, this is the worst quarterback room in the NFL without Deshaun Watson. And then they draft Davis Mills in the 3rd round. This to me, I agree with Mike Renner of PFF. I agree with his analysis of this pick, that they basically lit that pick on fire, because what's the plan here? You're going to build this offense for Tyrod Taylor. I think you'd be dumb not to do that. But you're also, assuming Deshaun Watson doesn't play here, you're not going to be good. Let's face it. This team's going to be picking in the top 3 to 5 of the draft next year. You're going to be drafting a quarterback. The odds of Davis Mills being so good as a rookie, as such a raw prospect on this team, being so good that you pass on a top quarterback in next year's draft, it's just not going to happen. Best case scenario, he looks like a Gardner Minshew, but look at the Jags. They still moved on from Gardner Minshew, because when you pick that high, you're looking for upside at the quarterback position. So this, to me, was a wasted pick. I don't believe in Davis Mills to work out. That said, I was a little bit earlier on Davis Mills. People were surprised when I had him in February in my top 10 quarterbacks list. The traits do kind of stand out relative to those other, day 2, day 3 quarterbacks. He's got the arm talent. He moves well. And there's some upside in there, because Stanford, honestly, they didn't run a very innovative offense. It was a lot of heavy personnel. They didn't ask a whole lot of him. But at the same time, you saw a lot of just inconsistent accuracy, or bad accuracy, if you will. And just the decision-making and the playmaking out of structure, it wasn't at an exciting level. So I just don't think there's a whole lot there in Davis Mills. I thought he needed a more quarterback-friendly environment to sit for multiple years to develop, to even become a Kirk Cousins or a Ryan Tannehill caliber player. His traits are kind of in that mold, but he has a long ways to go, and I just don't think that opportunity to develop in a nice way is going to happen here. And then Jeff Driscoll at QB3, if they get to Jeff Driscoll, they are in trouble. So the quarterback grade is 32nd in the NFL. That's obviously going to hurt, and yeah, it is what it is. Hoping Tyrod Taylor can have a big year. Then at running back, they had a nice couple additions here. They're bringing Philip Lindsay and Mark Ingram. It is what it is. It's a decent running back group. They rank 26th. They have David Johnson there. I do feel bad for David Johnson. He's one of the just, in general, good guys in the NFL. I follow him on Twitter. He's just a fun dude, good guy. Unfortunately gets traded basically for DeAndre Hopkins and was never going to be a fan favorite in Houston, no matter how good he was. And definitely regressing in age as well. Just doesn't have the same burst that he once did. But he's still a quality running back. The first couple weeks of last season, he actually looked kind of like his old self, and then that tapered off a little bit. So maybe kind of expecting a similar year there from David Johnson. But you could do worse than David Johnson as your first running back. Phillip Lindsay is a nice add here. Definitely fits the chip on your shoulder mentality here. Broncos fans love Phillip Lindsay after that rookie season. I told them to pump the brakes a little bit because there's just a lot of holes in his game. I don't think he has like amazing vision. He doesn't run with power necessarily. He's, crafty in the trenches. But he's been really held back throughout his career by a lack of stop-start ability. I think it does hurt him in certain run schemes like inside zone and stuff. But it's really held him back in the receiving game. And maybe David Johnson and Mark Ingram, who have always been really good at pass protection and good hands out of the backfield and that stuff, maybe they can bring him along in that aspect and elevate his game. But if nothing else, he's a nice counterpunch to David Johnson, give you that speed element. I do think they run the ball a lot here. So I think he'll be okay for the Texans. And then they bring in Mark Ingram. Okay, he just couldn't get on the field for Baltimore last year. He seems to just be washed up in age. He's taken a beating in his career. He's gone through a lot of injuries, so not expecting much from Mark Ingram other than a culture mentor role there. And then the depth, they have Dontre Hilliard, who got a couple games for Cleveland after some injuries up there. Really good blocking scheme up there. He had some success, but I don't think there's a whole lot there. Do keep an eye on Scotty Phillips. I thought he was a draftable running back a year ago, kind of that contact balance style, and then Buddy Howell there. So the running back group as a whole is going to rank 26th. That's not going to make or break their season. Really few running back rooms will. Now we've got this receiving group that to me is actually somewhat interesting. There's a lot of great receiving cores in the league, so this isn't going to rank like super high or anything, but I think they have some upside there that people aren't talking about, depending on the quarterback situation, of course. But you have Brandon Cooks, who has honestly become one of the more underrated players in the NFL at this point. He's been kind of bounced around the league. Teams don't seem to truly value him too high, but all he does when he's healthy is put up 1,000-yard seasons. And if you take the trading away DeAndre Hopkins, if you remove that trade, the acquisition of Brandon Cooks for a second-round pick by Bill O'Brien was really not bad. It was frankly good. He's a good, valuable deep threat in the NFL. You might not want him to be your number one receiver, but he's just a very underrated receiver at this point, especially when Watson was in there. I mean, 1,000-yard season for Brandon Cooks. They had a good rapport, so again, that connection probably not going to be there this year, but looking at the receiving core outside of that situation, you'll like Brandon Cooks in there. Randall Cobb, still a decent slot receiver, just has a hard time staying healthy, so that's tough to count on. I also would not be surprised if he is a surprising cut in the training camp, because they may want to get Kiki Kuti more opportunities to be more of that slot guy and open up an opportunity for Nico Collins, who I list as wide receiver 4, despite not being quite as good as Chris Conley at this point in time. But I do think you go with the youth at their stage to see what you have in Nico Collins. But yeah, Randall Cobb, decent slot receiver. Kiki Kuti I do like. He just hasn't gotten the full breadth of opportunities with all of the receivers that have been in front of him. I think this is his 4th year. If not, it's his 3rd year. They got to get a look at Kiki Kuti before they decide if they want to bring him back or not. So he's a big part of the receiving game here. Good, shifty, short to intermediate receiver, kind of that prototype slot guy. And then they draft Nico Collins in the 3rd round. They trade up for him. He's a good fit here, especially at that point in the draft. I didn't understand the kind of 2nd-round hype on Nico Collins, but I was fine with him. Late 3rd round, 4th round, where they got him. And they needed more of a bigger-bodied receiving threat. So I was totally fine with that draft pick. I think he has a good chance to become what they're looking for there in that, perimeter, big-bodied possession receiver. Not a speedy guy, but he can stack on the outside. The one thing you like about Nico Collins relative to a lot of these big-bodied possession guys is he does move really well. He has the lateral agility skills you look for. He can develop as a route runner, can really develop that release package off the line of scrimmage, because he does have the foot speed to do it. And if he does, he has a really nice upside as a quality number 2 outside receiver, maybe even a true number 1. I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but I do like Nico Collins there. It's just a matter of him developing with the staff and the quarterback situation allowing him to develop. They have Chris Conley, who is perfectly fine as a 5th wide receiver. That's really good depth. He'll be a good veteran presence there. He's had a nice back end of his career, was good for Jacksonville last year. Dante Moncrief I don't see making the team. And then they're going to have a competition with the 6th wide receiver spot, I think, between Alex Erickson and Andre Roberts. Both those guys really good kick returners. So Erickson, much better as an actual slot receiver, but with Kuti and Cobb there, do they just value Roberts' kick returning ability? Is Roberts in shape at his age? There's some dynamics there. And then Isaiah Coulter's still on the team as well. He's going to have to fight really hard to keep that spot. He might, they might keep 7 receivers, but they're probably, maybe going to practice squad him. I don't know. He hasn't really shown much as like a 5th or a 6th round pick a couple years ago. And then you got Chris Moore. Milton Williams, kind of a physical receiver, undrafted guy. I don't see him making the team. Then you have the tight end group. Very fascinating to me. Jordan Akins was under the radar pretty good last year. He's kind of in that mold of, call it Gerald Everett, Jonnu Smith. Not quite the caliber of those guys, but 6'4", 240 pounds. Just put the ball in his hands. Kind of a guy that can run away from linebackers. Good after the catch. Terrible blocker. So that could hurt them, especially if they want to run the ball a lot. So you have Pharaoh Brown, who's a better blocker, actually had a good year last year when called upon. And then they draft Brevin Jordan, who was a really nice pick in the 5th round, similar to Jordan Akins, undersized tweener type, kind of part receiver, part fullback, part tight end, but really good with the ball in his hands, good run after the catch guy. I compared him to Gerald Everett, and probably the better blocker between him and Jordan Akins. So we'll see how much he gets on the field. And then also keep an eye on Cahill Waring, was a 3rd round pick several years ago, but a guy that had barely played any football. He has a lot of upside, especially if they do run, like I said, that play action, read option system. A pretty good blocker. It's just a matter of him developing those receiving skills. I don't think they're done with Cahill Waring. Maybe they are, but I still think he has a chance to break out. So you got really 4 tight ends there. I think we see a lot of heavy packages, a lot of utilization of these guys. You got Ryan Izzo, Anthony Auclair. Maybe they keep a 5th tight end. Seems kind of unlikely. And then with the receiving running backs here, David Johnson, still the best guy there. He's not as explosive, but still one of the best skill sets as far as route running, hands, catching traffic, that kind of stuff. Philip Lindsay, Mark Ingram, you either take the guy with no receiving skills and speed, or the guy that is really refined and a good pass protector, but just has tapered off athletically. And then the other guys I'm not expecting a whole lot. So I do think David Johnson's the primary 3rd down back here. Maybe you see a little bit more of Lindsay and Ingram on earlier downs. So I don't think this receiving core is going to break their season. Like I said, there's a lot of good receiving cores in the NFL. This is not one of the best. It ranks 30th. But I think they have some interesting pieces here. And if the right guys develop with Kiki, Collins, these tight ends, this could exceed this 30th ranking for sure. Then we got the offensive line. It's not a very good offensive line. I like some of the things they've done, however. So you have Laramie Tunsil at left tackle. They overpaid for him from the draft capital perspective, but at least to Bill O'Brien's credit, they did develop Laramie Tunsil. I thought that was a serious overpay when they got him, but he has emerged as, I would say, a top 5 left tackle in the NFL, if not top 5, right in that conversation. So you have no concerns at left tackle. He's the best player on this team at this point in time. But then the rest of this is a pretty major question mark. You have Max Sharping at left guard, who, as a 2nd round pick, has not really developed and is a serious question mark. I do wonder if he loses that job out to Lane Taylor, who I do think is a better football player. It's just a matter of, do they go with the youth? Is Lane Taylor healthy? That's a question mark, but I definitely think Lane Taylor would be better for this offensive line than Max Sharping. They have Justin Britt at center. Again, do they try Lane Taylor at center as well? I think you get some flexibility there. I think Lane Taylor's a guy that could play center in a pinch. I don't think he's done it in his career, but he has the size and kind of experience to run that position. Britt took a year off last year. Hell, I think he even retired and is now back. He at a point in time was a good center for the Seahawks, a really good run blocker, but he had really tapered off and regressed, and it's hard to expect much from him. You assume he's in good shape and is going to maybe be a little bit better than he used to be after taking a year off, but that's a tough projection right there. So center and left guard are the major question marks. I do love the addition of Marcus Cannon. I think that was one of the brilliant moves that Caserio made here. Now, is he playing right guard or right tackle? That's up in the air. Titus Howard came along late last year. They spent a 1st round pick on him, and he was always going to be a developmental piece. So I do find it likely that they stick with Titus Howard at right tackle. We've seen some of these guys around the league that were 1st round picks take some time to develop. Colton Miller for the Raiders, Garrett Bowles for the Broncos, kind of in that mold. So that would be huge for the Texans if Titus Howard can take that next step up this year, and all of a sudden you have a really good young tackle duo there to build around a potential future quarterback. And then Marcus Cannon's a guy who he's had some experience to play guard. He's 6'5", 330, and at his age, his feet are slowing down. So that might actually be best for him to move into right guard. And, if Britt works out, if he's in shape, you got Titus Howard at right tackle, and then you emerge with a starter at left guard, Lane Taylor and Max Sharping. This offensive line can be maybe a top 20 unit, which is coming a long way from what they were several years ago. They do rank 26 right now because of a lot of those question marks, and it's not like the depth is great here. Roderick Johnson can kind of play some tackle. You do got Lane Taylor, Justin McCray, Hjalti Froholt, Jaron Christian. O-line depth just doesn't really exist around the league in general, so I guess this is better O-line depth than a lot of teams have, but doesn't mean they don't have question marks. So they rank 26th. There's 6 offensive lines worse than them, so it's, I guess, some positive thinking there for the Texans, and I think if some of those things work out, they can actually exceed that ranking pretty easily, honestly. So the offense as a whole is going to rank dead last in the league, 32nd. It's just not a great outlook. You have a lot of question marks across the board, really quarterback, receiver, offensive line, just coaching in general. What does the combination of David Coley and Tim Kelly look like? I do think from an offensive coaching standpoint, they're not the worst in the league. I think Tim Kelly actually did a really good job calling plays last year, and he's a young mind. I think he's kind of an underrated guy that has an opportunity as a part of this kind of prove everyone wrong culture here. Has an opportunity to step up and be a good offensive coordinator for this team. It's just the cards are really stacked against this team because of the quarterback situation. They don't have top talent at any position, and they're putting all of these different pieces together. So it's really complicated to predict how good this offense is going to be. And with all of those things considered, I don't think it's controversial to say they will be the worst offense in the NFL. And then as far as the offensive scheme goes, I want to spend more time talking about scheme in these deep dives this year. I'm going to list it as West Coast for now because the implementation of the heavy read option offense, kind of that Ravens play action style offense, that's much more of a projection. Tim Kelly is still the offensive coordinator here who ran a lot of the Bill O'Brien offense, kind of schematically speaking. The West Coast offense, a lot of inside zone, a lot of screens, to kind of act as their run game with these good, guys after the catch in this offense. And then, quick hitting passing concepts. And they did a good job with a lot of deep vertical crossers as well with this system. So I think we'll see a combination of that and the Ravens offense. But for now, I will list it as a West Coast offense as them running the sort of Ravens style offense is very much a projection at this point in time. So now it's time to change gears and start talking about Lovie Smith's defense here. And we're just going to hop in and start talking about the run defense here. To be completely honest, this Texans defense from a run defense standpoint and overall was really difficult to watch. Teams really had their way with this front. And unfortunately, I don't see it being that different for the Texans this year. They're really squishy up front, It's not like they're going to be rocking with this amazing coaching staff, this amazing home field advantage. They're a little light in their linebacking core in general. So overall, I do not see this being a good run defense. It actually ranks dead last in the league, which I think is fair given their personnel and how they performed in this department last year. If I felt better about Lovie Smith, then maybe that'd boost them up. But to be honest, it's not like Lovie Smith has been this great defensive coordinator wherever he's gone. I'm honestly a little surprised that he's still getting jobs. But here we are. Here's their unit. So let's start with the defensive tackles because that is the biggest part of the run defense, and that's what's really dragging this down. Their 2 best defensive tackles are abysmal run defenders at best. Malik Collins honestly probably won't see a ton of early down work, even though he's going to be listed as their number 1 defensive tackle. He's just never been a disciplined run defender, always kind of a full steam ahead power rusher. He has the physical traits to play better run defense, but that's never been his game. And Ross Blacklock is just incredibly light, was moved all over the place last year, and was rough to watch as a rookie on the field. You hope his pass rush is better than the 61 run defense grade we give him here, but based on your two best defensive tackles, it's going to be hard to set the tone. Now, they do have some better interior depth, although it's not great. Vincent Taylor, the Roy Lopez is a rookie they drafted who should be a decent run defender as an early down rotational piece. Brandon Dunn, they pick up Jaleel Johnson from Minnesota. But yeah, man, the interior contribution to this run defense is going to be ugly. I don't see a comparable unit as far as how bad these guys are going to be against the run. It does get better on the edge. This was a big focal point in the Shaq Lawson edition. He is one of the better just pure run defending edge guys, getting back into more of the traditional edge role here as a 4-3 defensive end. A tough spot in that kind of hybrid multiple front. Wasn't quite as good for Miami last year. I think he'll get back to what he was for Buffalo as that 4-3 defensive end and make it difficult on teams to get the edge in this division on, say, Derrick Henry on that wide zone offense. But that's the biggest upgrade they made this offseason. But again, they did lose Benardrick McKinney, who was supposed to be their best run defender up front. And then Whitney Mercilus, slated to be the starter, might take to be more of the rotational third down edge rusher if he even makes this team. He was terrible last year, getting up there in age. So you do have a combination of Jordan Jenkins, who they did sign. I would not be surprised to see him kind of cement himself as the early down run defender, which would be the best case for this defense. So that's up in the air. Also, Charles Omenihu, where does he fit in here? Not really an early down interior defensive tackle. Played that kind of hybrid 3-4 defensive end role for them and was one of their better defenders last year. Just a little bit harder to project him into this 4-3 defense. I could see him also playing an early down kind of edge Michael Bennett role in the 4-3 defense here. So I would say the front will be moving around as far as who's playing run defense here, early down work. But we're just going to list the starters there. And then the linebacking group, I have no problems with Zach Cunningham. Just a good overall linebacker. He's, in the top half of starting linebackers in the league, so he'll contribute for sure. You got Kevin Pierre-Louis, more of a coverage nickel linebacker, and then Christian Kirksey historically has been a solid run defender, but the last couple years, injuries have stacked up, and he's been really abysmal getting off blocks and being a secure tackler, so he could start there. Kamu Grugier-Hill, there it is. Neville Hewitt also could be in the mix there for that third base defense linebacker. But overall, there's no way around it. I don't expect this to be a good run defense. They weren't a good run defense last year. And there you go. So let's go ahead and talk about the pass rush now. A little bit better, but also going to rank dead last in the league. Now, the gap between them and the next team is much closer than the run defense gap is. But you do take a dip on the edge because Shaq Lawson, while he's a good run defender, is not much of a pass rusher at all. Again, Whitney Mercilus had a drop-off, and Jordan Jenkins as well is a better run defender than a pass rusher. So you have massive questions on the edge. If Charles Omenihu is rushing from the edge, he might be their best edge rusher, but he also might be an interior rusher, depending on how they want to use Collins and Ross Blacklock. So massive questions on the edge. And then the interior pass rush is maybe a little bit better if you project Charles Omenihu on the inside there, but it's just not very good. Malik Collins is a much better interior rusher. I think he's got that role solidified for them. And then you're looking at some combination of Shaq Lawson, Ross Blacklock, and Charles Omenihu duking it out for that interior rush. Now, there's some guys to keep an eye on here. The interior rush really has nobody after the guys we've already mentioned, but you do have DeMarcus Walker here, who has had some ups and downs in Denver, but very redundant with Charles Omenihu. I don't see him being better, but he has some explosion. And then definitely keep an eye on Duke Ejiofor. If he can stay healthy, he's a player I liked. At a one point in time, I actually had mocked Duke Ejiofor in the first round till we found out how bad the injury concerns are for him, and those injury concerns have absolutely surfaced in the NFL. He's not been able to stay healthy, but a guy to keep an eye on is a guy that has a lot of traits as a rusher when he can get on the field. And then Jonathan Grenard was overdrafted last year, in my opinion, and I just don't see a whole lot in him, whether it's physical traits or polish as a rusher. So he'll probably get buried here. He'll get some reps, but I don't see much contribution there. overall, this pass rush is definitely not looking pretty. It was bad last year, and I don't expect that to change this year. So a rough start for the front of this defense, ranking dead last in both run defense and pass rush. It does get a little bit greener as we move into just the linebacking core alone. We do separate these because, linebackers contribute as run defenders, as coverage players, as a leadership role. There's something to be said about just the linebackers and what they can contribute separately to the front four. So you've got Zach Cunningham in the middle. Again, I think he's somewhere in the 10 to 16 range of best linebackers in the league. He's paid as such. He's got really good length to get off blocks and be a secure tackler. And in previous seasons, he's been a pretty good coverage player as well. I like the way he's going to fit into this cover 2 heavy system. I think he can play that mid-read role where he's responsible for picking up the first guy that goes up the seam and running vertically with that player. I think he has the athletic traits to do that, as does Kevin Pierre-Louis, who to me is one of this team's more underrated players. Had a really good year in Washington, was excellent for Chicago the year before that. Just someone that for some reason the league doesn't seem to buy into. But I'm a big fan of Kevin Pierre-Louis. I think this was a really nice signing for them, and he's going to elevate this linebacking core, at least as a nickel defender. I don't think he's much of a run defender, but I love what he brings to the table in coverage, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Kevin Pierre-Louis be more of that mid-read guy and keep Zach Cunningham a little closer to the box. So I'm excited to see how Lovie Smith uses those in this kind of now unique cover 2 system. We don't see a lot of that in the NFL these days. And then Christian Kirksey, from a coverage standpoint, probably not going to see the field a ton. I actually like Grugier Hill better in coverage, but I do project Kirksey to win that starting third linebacker role. It's not even really a starting role anymore. That's more of your base defense that you're only seeing 15-20% of the time. Maybe it's a rotation there. Neville Hewitt was probably the best of these three, but kind of a one-year wonder breakout veteran there for Hewitt with the Jets. So it's a deep linebacking core. Probably one of the deeper linebacking groups in the NFL. They signed a ton of guys. I also need to mention Garrett Wallow, who they drafted. Athletic project out of TCU. They definitely see him as the long-term, maybe Kevin Pierre-Louis role here. If Lovie Smith sticks around, which is a question mark in its own. But if you want that athletic mid-read cover 2 linebacker, Garrett Wallow can absolutely play that role. They signed Joe Thomas, a veteran, probably just going to contribute on special teams, and I don't see either Nickerson or Tay Davis making the team there. But a pretty solid linebacking group here. They're going to rank 16th in the league. It's the best thing they have going for them as a team. You'd rather you say that about your pass rush or your coverage unit, but it's a relative strength for this team is the talent and depth of this linebacking group. I don't think will be an issue for this defense. Then you have the defensive backs. They've got some depth, some pieces here, some guys I'm excited to see play this year. So Bradley Roby is their number 1 corner. He actually stepped up and was really solid last year. Gets well paid here. He's a solid starting corner. Ideally, he'd probably be your number 2 corner, but he's their number 1, so a little bit of a rough start there. And then, as I mentioned, they are losing Garyon Conley here. Really was not a scheme fit for the cover 2 defense, so I understand that. They bring in Terrence Mitchell, who's a much smarter football player. He is one of the most stable veterans in the league, which is saying a lot to do that as a cornerback, because cornerback is a position that really fluctuates week to week and especially year to year. But Terrence Mitchell has been like a solid average starting corner in multiple different systems for like 4 or 5 straight years. This was a good signing. He's a good player for a team that's not attracting top talent. I think there's very few options that were better than Terrence Mitchell for this team. So I think he'll be a solid number 2 corner. It's a decent signing. I do expect him to beat out Vernon Hargreaves, who's just the opposite of Terrence Mitchell, where he's a high upside week to week guy, but 3 out of 4 weeks he stinks, and then he has one good week that keeps his job for another year. So I do see Hargreaves becoming more of a backup for this team. And then Desmond King is going to be the slot corner, I fully expect, unless they go with him at safety, which is possible, but I fully expect him to be their starting nickel corner. He's their second best defensive back. He's definitely their best corner. And I love his scheme fit, as I mentioned, in the cover 2 system here, where he's going to be playing a lot of zone coverages in the short to intermediate game. and not being asked to do much more than that. It's a similar role to what he would be doing in the cover 4 heavy system that he was thriving in the cover 3 system. Just zone in general in that slot role is all pretty similar for when he was crushing it for the Chargers. So I love that signing. I talked about when the Titans signed him that he'll be fine, and he was, but that it wasn't this amazing Pro Bowl caliber corner in that system. You know, you got to consider scheme fits for every position, but especially for corner. Desmond King's not a great man corner. He's not a great athlete. It's why he originally fell to the 4th round, and probably why the Chargers didn't place a premium on retaining him. But in a zone-heavy system that I fully expect this to be with Lovie Smith, I think Desmond King can get back to Pro Bowl level play as one of the top slot corners in the league. I'm a big fan of Desmond King. So you could do worse than those 3 corners. There's no star talent there. Maybe Desmond King is as the slot player. And then the depth, you have Keon Crossan, who actually showed some flashes last year, originally just a special teamer, but he's a guy with 4.3 speed who is developing in that special teams role as a cover player. So I don't know how he fits into this defense or if he gets a lot of playing time. Maybe he beats out Vernon Hargreaves, but he still has some upside. If nothing else, he's one of the top cover players from a coverage standpoint on kicks and stuff, not on the field as a cornerback. And then John Reed, keep an eye on him. You know, with Desmond King there, it's going to be a little bit harder for him to see the field, but this is a system that will allow shorter corners to potentially step outside if you had an injury to Roby or Terrence Mitchell. And John Reed's a very smart player with experience in the slot, so I like him potentially to play outside corner here as well. Really athletic dude. I like that pick that they made last year. He just didn't get to see the field. And then the depth after that is pretty miserable. You know, Taviri Thomas, Cornell Armstrong, Shaheem Carter has some upside. A smart player at Alabama, maybe in this system could work. And then Tremon Smith's basically just been a return man in his career. So the cornerback group is, you know, okay. There's a lot of better cornerback groups out there, but I don't think it's the biggest liability for this team out there. And then the safety group, I'm a big fan of Justin Reed. I think the dude's a total stud. Just, you know, safeties in general are going to benefit from better pass rushes in front of them, better coverage guys in front of them, forcing bad mistakes and forcing guys off first reads. Justin Reed just hasn't had the opportunities that some of the more opportunistic safeties in the league have had playing behind better defenses. So I love Justin Reed. He can do everything. He's the ultimate do-it-all safety. He's got range as a free safety. It's a guy that played slot corner at Stanford, so he's more than comfortable coming down, manning guys up in the box. He can play free safety, strong safety. Dramatically improved his tackling last year, which you'll love to see, just guys working on their weaknesses. He is, let's just say, playing on a better defense away from me being revered as one of the premier safeties in the league. So big fan of Justin Reed. I think he's the best player on this defense. And then you have Lonnie Johnson, who actually was really solid converting from cornerback to strong safety. I'm excited to see him in year 2 as a full-time safety in a cover 2 system that actually should play really well to his skill set. So again, he looked really good, and I never thought he was worth a second-round pick as a corner, but he totally has the physical skill set to play safety, and both these guys have experience playing cornerback, so that gives them flexibility to run cover 4, which I expect them to do a lot of to match the cover 2 system, because in a cover 4, if you're a safety, you got to flip your hips and oftentimes cover corner routes and convert into man-to-man coverage. So I think both these guys can do that. Lonnie Johnson just a little bit unproven, but a lot of upside there with him. And then you have Eric Murray, again, a guy with cornerback experience. So your top 3 safeties give you a ton of flexibility. And if Lonnie Johnson takes another step up, which I think he can, you could have a really solid safety duo there. And overall, maybe a top 20 secondary when all is said and done. The safety depth after that does drop off. You got Terrence Brooks, who's kind of a veteran safety who's played a lot of different roles for different defenses. A.J. Moore, another kind of versatile guy. So the defensive back rate as a whole is going to come in 29th. Not trying to oversell this group of defensive backs, but there's some talent here and room to outperform that 29th ranking, especially when you look at like maybe Justin Reed and Lonnie Johnson emerging and maybe Desmond King getting back to form. But the cornerback 1, cornerback 2 situation is far from ideal here, which ultimately that's the core of a coverage grade. So, again, the defense ranking 32nd. Dead last, both offense and defense. Without Deshaun Watson on this team, it's just kind of inevitable. They have too many moving parts, such a lack of talent. I think if the culture really gets built up here and they really buy into the chip on your shoulder mentality and all of these pieces come in for Lovie Smith's ideal cover 2 defense, there's a chance. But without the pass rush, without the defensive line in general, and without top corners, it's just going to be virtually impossible for this Texans defense to be anything close to average. Like, let's just be honest, it's a terrible unit. I'm not a fan of Lovie Smith. Yeah, he's got a lot of experience, but I'm not expecting him to come in and completely overhaul this defense in the ways that it needs to be done. And on top of that, home field here, I no disrespect to Texans fans. They're very loyal, and when this team's winning, that stadium can get rocking, but I just don't see it happening with a team that is so deflated all around. I just don't see this team like getting up for the Texans or even showing up, honestly. So we'll see what this whole defense looks like. Of course, we've kind of gone in depth at this point with it being a cover 2 heavy defense. You know, Lovie Smith goes back to the days of when cover 2 was elite. But even today, the highest running cover 2 defenses aren't like strictly running that. It's probably going to be a large balance of the different zones between cover 2, cover 3, and cover 4. I don't expect a ton of man coverage, though I do think between the corners and the safeties and the linebackers, they could run it. So Lovie has some flexibility there. But I don't know if they have the pass rush, frankly, to run a very good man coverage system. So, yeah, dead last for the defense, dead last for the offense. I do think the special teams will be solid. They had actually a really good special teams last year. They have really good coverage unit guys like Joe Thomas, Keon Crossan. They've got a good kick returner competition that we talked about between Andre Roberts and Alex Erickson. The kicking game is solid, good, not great. I do think with this culture as well, that might be where you see the chip on your shoulder culture kind of show up, and the depth of this team, frankly. You know, they don't have a lot of, you know, let's just call it like practice squad talent that will end up playing special teams like a lot of teams do. You're going to get a lot of veterans fighting for their paychecks playing special teams. So I do think the special teams will be pretty solid for what it's worth. The overall culture is dead last in the league as well. It's just a team and organizational dysfunction. I do think that grade has a chance to improve. I buy into David Culley as a head coach. I think he is a motivator, which is exactly what they were looking for in that hire. And I think that chip on your shoulder culture could show up. But the organizational dysfunction is too much. You have the Deshaun Watson situation that I think is kind of muddying this whole culture as a whole. So it's a wait and see kind of culture here to see how does David Culley manage all this and do all of these moving pieces work and mold together and mesh for that all-important culture. Because no team in the NFL had more turnover than the Houston Texans this offseason. So the strengths and weaknesses of this team, I really do think a strength worth mentioning, even though we just ranked them dead last for culture. If you're going to find a reason for optimism for this team, it is that sort of underdog, chip on your shoulder mentality that if they really did assemble this collection of kind of badasses that were rejected by the league and guys that are just here to prove themselves, that can ignite a fire and spark some things for the team. And that is a strength of this team potentially. And then just the veteran depth in general is going to be a strength of this team. If one guy goes down, say what you want about the top talent on this team because it's not good, but they do really have like established experience depth at a lot of positions here. So I do think they're going to be a very injury resistant team. So that could help them down the road. But overall, there's a lot more weaknesses than strengths. You obviously have dysfunction at the quarterback position that is just going to derail this team at some point. They have a lack of star talent at virtually every position on the team. They have a lack of a pass rush, which is going to make it very difficult to play defense, which they don't have a great coverage unit either. So that's a weakness. And run defense. Teams are going to be able to run all over this team. So it's tough to find strengths. I wanted to point out some potential aspects. Despite we rank them 32nd in culture, I do think that has a chance to kind of be the identity and strength of the team, is this sort of us against the world, cohesive mentality, if they can put that all together. So we're going to wrap up now and talk about this team's schedule and their Vegas over-under prediction. So they are actually at an over-under of 5 wins, and that has got to be because of Deshaun Watson maybe playing here. And I think that might be Vegas saying, hey, Deshaun Watson might play 10 games here for the Texans. So if that happens, that, of course, changes all of this stuff. But without Deshaun Watson here, I have them going 1-16. And very similar to last year's Jaguars, with a week 1 upset kind of coming out of training camp, fiery, like everyone's doubting us against the world. And then very quickly against Cleveland the next week, you see that talent gap really drop off. So sorry, Jacksonville, to make you the one team that loses to the Houston Texans here. I don't think this is an 0-17 team. There's parts of this team that I like, and I think they'll win 1 game, so I had to put it somewhere, and that's the way we're going with Jacksonville week 1. But I have this as a 1-win team without Deshaun Watson. It's a rough outlook. I think this defense is going to be historically bad. And offensively, I am excited to see kind of the direction they go. I will say the ceiling for me is 10 wins. I think if Deshaun Watson plays, this team is in the playoff picture, which sounds crazy, but Deshaun Watson is that good. So they're going to probably have the largest floor to ceiling differential of any team in this league because of the Deshaun Watson situation. I think they're a 1-win team without him, and they're like an 8 to 10 win team with him. So there is the first deep dive, everybody. I hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed putting this together. That is the first of 32 teams. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of the new format, what you thought of what it said about the Texans. Did I leave anybody out? Texans fans, do you agree or disagree with my outlook on the team? Let me know in the comments down below. Please do hit that like button as well, and make sure you guys subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss the rest of this series. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you in probably 3 or 4 days until we get to deep dive number 31. Who's it going to be, baby? Let me know in the comments down below who you think comes in 31. Until next time, cheers. See you later.